Good evening. This is Tim Ash, President of the Vermont State Senate. It is May 12th, here for my nightly update on Vermont's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As one person who views a number of my videos pointed out recently, I have quarantine hair, so I'm waiting anxiously for the ability to have the trim that I so desperately need. It doesn't help that it was windy out today. Today I'm going to spend my time talking about really the transition point that the legislature has largely been moved over to. So for the last 2 months, and we're a day away from 2 full calendar months from the beginning of the state of emergency, the legislature has been focused exclusively on passing legislation that would allow us to flexibly and successfully address the public health crisis that we face. And we've been doing everything we can to expedite the process of getting dollars in people's pockets despite the Department of Labor's challenges, and to prepare some of the economic foundation that we need in order to move forward. That meant giving some relief in terms of when people had to pay their taxes, whether it was personal taxes or business taxes and so on. So we are not out of the woods, and we know that there is an anticipated increase in the number of positive tests in the fall or winter. It just seems to be a matter of when, not if, and all the governors around the country are hearing the same message about that. But right now, we have largely suppressed any new positive tests, and clearly the governor's executive orders have continued to loosen up the restraints that we've had on our activities. So right now we've got 2 competing voices around the state. There, on the one hand, are many business owners and many people who say, open it up faster, the economy, let people get back to as many activities that are normal as possible, although doing it safely. And there are others who say, nope, we shouldn't open up any of these activities because it's still premature and too risky. So the governor has his challenge of making decisions using his executive authority, and the legislature has its challenge, trying to figure out how we balance where we think we can safely open things up with making sure that we're not doing things too quickly. I don't want to be the state of Georgia putting lots of people's lives at risk the way we've seen their governor and their legislature sort of complicit in that. So, but with that said, we're now in a new place, which is that the legislature doesn't have to spend much time at the moment passing legislation to allow healthcare providers to flexibly meet people's needs. The resources for treating patients appear to be in place. The demand on PPE seems to have not gone away, but largely settled down throughout the state because of more purchasing and so on. We now have to start thinking about where we're going to head from here. And so I want to just talk briefly about the context that we're working in, which I've described before, but just to set the table. And then I'm going to offer a few categories of policy and budget spending areas that we'll really need your thoughts about to help pave the way forward. So I've mentioned in the past that we are facing a pretty significant budget hole for next year. The next budget year starts July 1. It runs until June 30th of 2021. And the expected reduction in revenue to the state, meaning all of the taxes that people pay on income or sales tax or rooms and meals, alcohol taxes, all that stuff, we're expecting a more than $430 million decline based on the economic hit all around us. $430 million, I know that for all of us is a big number, but it can be hard to know how that relates to the state budget. The state budget is about $6 billion. A good chunk of that is federal money that comes in for transportation or healthcare. So when you take all that out of the equation, what we're really talking about is a roughly 15 to 20% reduction in state money, not federal money, but state money. And that is $430 million is just so hard. And I'll just tell you, this is the time of year I was supposed to be out making grandiose promises as a candidate for office, and I'll have to do that later. But at the moment, I look at the spreadsheet and see the worst financial hole in Vermont's history. And it's a pretty sobering thing as a legislator who doesn't just have a vision for the state and lots of policies I want to see enacted, but a legislator who understands how the budget works and used to chair the committee that handled all of the revenues. So when I see $430 million, I almost lose my breath. It's just a number that is so shocking. So how we're going to deal with that, I have also learned over the years that it is okay, and hopefully a sign of maturity for me. I'm not so sure my partner would agree. It's okay sometimes to say you just don't know yet. And right now, that's my answer. I don't know yet how we're going to deal with such a large gap. I know that the federal money that came to us, which right now cannot be used very flexibly to fill these holes, it is my very fervent hope that those dollars will be made available so that the state can avoid some really unthinkable changes to the way we do things here. Because the first things that will go if the federal government isn't flexible, the first things will go are the ones that don't really save people's lives or are critical to people meeting their very, very basic needs. So all of the economic development funds that we have would probably be on the chopping block first. All of the grants we make to farmers and food producers would probably be on the edges. A lot of our transportation projects would be deferred, the ones that if we don't do them, it makes people less safe. Water quality projects. We've finally, after many, many years, come up with a long-term plan and funding to clean up our Lake Champlain and all the other lakes and waters. And that would be probably on the chopping block. You get the picture. These are all really, really difficult things to even contemplate. So my hope is that the federal government will get its act together, that Congress will do the right thing, stand up to the president, make these dollars flexible so that we can kind of rebuild, have a rebirth of the state without people who really need the types of activities state government supports to get by and succeed. And that isn't just low-income people. Many businesses and people in the middle class also require an interaction with the state to live successful lives here and run successful businesses. So we're all in really league to make sure that we get the flexibility from the federal government as possible. But that said, one of the things that I think is probably true of this crisis, because of the big gap and the ways people have had to flexibly step up to meet basic needs for the last 2 months, is that we know that some things we may want to change as we move forward. We may use the recovery process coming out of COVID-19 as an opportunity to make some changes that maybe in a normal year would be hard because all the lobbyists would be fighting for their same dollar, and we would do, piecemeal approaches just so that every constituency group got something, and every legislator would feel like they could go home and say that they got some small thing for their district. And maybe now it's an opportunity to think a little bit more globally about shifting the way some of our core activities are. And so I'm about to list off a few areas that I think need to be central to our thinking about the recovery process. And as I raise them, I'm not raising them because I have an answer about what exactly to do, but rather to solicit your thoughts. So I do encourage you, either on Facebook here or by email, to let me know what you would do, what you would have us do in the legislature and have the governor sign off on to help see Vermont be in a stronger place once we regain our footing and get to the other side of this, rather than one where we're weaker and less of the state we love because of the in the grand scheme of things, horrible blip on the time horizon that we're going through right now. So the first area that I think we really need to be thoughtful about in terms of recovery is this is an order, not necessarily a rank order, but our restaurants, bars, and other service areas, service industry entities, including bed and breakfast, inns, hotels, you name it. So they were all effectively shut down overnight back in March. And it's not like we had some contingency plan for how we were going to deal with them once the public health crisis starts to go away. So many of the employees of inns and hotels and restaurants and bars, they qualified for unemployment. The federal government provided a generous boost. So for many of them, they are still having income, still able to pay the bills. However, the proprietors of many of these businesses have not been able to, they aren't eligible for unemployment or self-employed assistance from the feds, nor do the federal loan programs that have received a lot of publicity, like the PPP, Payroll Protection Program. They don't work for a business that doesn't have a return date to start their operations again. So we have this strange situation where we basically shut down all of the income for an entire industry, which Vermont really relies upon. We shut it down overnight. Now we're starting to see opportunities to gently reopen, but many of these proprietors are now looking and saying, well, wait, I've been out of business for 2 months. We can start to slowly ramp up over the next maybe 3 months. But then what if September or October comes and we're told we have to shut down again? Obviously, that's not the kind of predictability that we can offer right now, nor is it the kind of predictability that a business needs to be able to make longer-term decisions. So that's one area that we're really going to need to be sensitive to, because we're not talking right now about, the Ritz-Carlton chain. We're not talking about, all the Olive Garden, all these places that, were receiving so much heat because they took some of the federal money. What we're talking about is in-state Vermont businesses owned by people that we all know, and how to make sure that all of the work they put into their small businesses doesn't evaporate because of something that had nothing to do with their ability to run a business. So I will look forward to hearing what your thoughts are about we'll call it the hospitality or restaurant and lodging industries. The same applies to retail stores. Think about every locally owned retail store that you've ever been inside and know that the owner took a huge chance. Many of them don't bring home a lot of money, especially in the early years, and these are often low-margin businesses. And right now, while their employees are being addressed through unemployment, the owners don't qualify. And so if they can't really reopen and bring back the income streams, it raises questions about what the quality and character of our downtowns and village centers are going to look like if these businesses don't have the kind of predictability they need to have. So one of the things I hope you'll do is think about what you believe is appropriate for the public to do to help those particular kinds of businesses, which really define our downtowns and communities. What is the expectation of government to step in and help? And I really enlist your best thinking, because Vermont would not be the same without them. There can be no denying that, and we got to find a way to work together to make sure they're healthy on the other side of it. Agriculture and food production, another area that we have some real hardship right now, but also some opportunity. The hardship comes with dairy farmers who are having to dump milk right now because they can't find anyone to buy it. People who sell largely to restaurants who've basically lost their client base. People who were dependent on farmers markets, especially the early income from the first maybe month or month and a half of operating farmers markets. All that income gone. And obviously we have a lot riding on the health of our agricultural sector for a couple reasons. One, we get local food, an increasing amount each year, I should add, but also they keep our working landscape open, which is one of the reasons most of us love living in Vermont. We don't want to drive around and see freeways and strip malls everywhere we turn. And it's the farmers who work that land who really are preserving the heart and soul and the character of our state. So That's the challenge, is that they have all been really suffering in terms of their business models. The opportunity, I think, is exemplified by the way many of them have stepped up over the recent months to figure out ways to get locally produced food into the hands of local people. Our food shelves and food pantries have received a tremendous amount of food from local producers. Many of our larger institutional customers have dropped off in the short term. The colleges obviously didn't have students on campus, so there was a reduction in purchasing there. But I think this has heightened the opportunity to reinvigorate the relationships between local producers and our largest institutions. And so it just seems that we've been striving over recent years to increase investment in our working landscape and in diversified agriculture throughout the state, every region. We've made a lot of progress. I have co-authored bills that have probably resulted in hundreds of grants to small farmers and small producers so that they could get their businesses up and running. But now I think it is the time to double down or triple down on a strategy of supporting local purchasing of food. And if not, I don't know that there's going to be a better time. And so that may include working with the restaurants and say, one of the ways we'll support you is by effectively subsidizing or helping pay some of the cost of the premium that comes with purchasing local foods when there is a premium to be paid. So additional, not to use a pun, food for thought, that I would really look forward to hearing what your thoughts are about how to deal with that. Broadband. Broadband is a really challenging public problem. Back in 2009 and 10, Governor Douglas said he was promised we were going to have universal broadband and cell phone coverage. That didn't happen by the end of his term. Governor Shumlin came in 2011, 2012, said we are going to have universal broadband and cell phone coverage. Then that turned into universal cell phone coverage. And then I think even his administration at one point gave in and concluded that the promise couldn't be kept. Part of that has been, and this is a bit of an inside baseball piece of information, but I think it's important to know. Some people will say, well, why won't the federal government just give Vermont a grant to do all this? Why haven't they done this the last 10 years? Well, to make a long story short, when we were in the Great Recession, Vermont received a company in Vermont, VTEL, which is out of Springfield, received a very significant federal grant to provide wireless broadband at a pretty high level to every Vermonter who didn't already have high-quality broadband. Well, that project failed to deliver, but as a result, the federal government's position all these years since has been, we gave you the money to solve that problem. It's not our fault that you didn't get it done. So we're not giving you any more money for that. So Vermont has faced the really difficult question of how would we pay for it? The cost at one point a few years ago was estimated as high as $1 billion to do fiber to all the remaining homes. We've seen more recent proposals that are in the few $100 million. And those are numbers that are very difficult to derive from just Vermont funds. However, with the federal relief bills, this presents a new opportunity to think about how we're going to get broadband to more households who need it. The failure to have broadband has really been called out by the COVID-19 crisis in a couple ways. Telehealth and telemedicine have been made all the more difficult when some people do not have high-quality broadband at home. Delivering distance education to our K through 12 students for kids who do not have high-speed broadband access at home has made the ability to teach them remotely virtually impossible for many school districts. Those are just a couple examples of ways in which the inability of some to access high-speed internet puts a real crimp in our state's ability to succeed. And I think that maybe now is the moment, using federal funds, to step it up and solve this problem once and for all if we can achieve it with the dollars they have. And then two more items before I wrap. The first is public school infrastructure. So we have a dynamic right now where we have hundreds of schools all throughout the state. And right now they're being told, rightly, that school districts should expect to open up in person in the fall. And I'm glad that that is the current message. However, we have to be realistic. Things could change. And so they're also being asked to have backup plans. But for a moment, let's operate under the assumption that school will be open with in-person instruction in the fall. If students need to be distanced 6 feet, if students have to wear masks, if students have to be ready to turn to distance learning at a moment's notice, the way we had to just a couple months ago, all of these things will require some level of planning and physical space modifications. If you have 20 kids in a classroom, but the room isn't big enough to have 20 with 6-foot distancing, this raises issues not just for the use of classroom space, but also whether class structures have to be broken up. Maybe class sizes go down, but that puts more demand on the teaching staff. So there are going to be a number of interesting pickles faced by our public schools, and now is the time to be thinking about how we make some investments so that when we get to the fall, we're ready for whatever is thrown at us. And then last piece, and this is not an exhaustive list, but some things to prompt your thinking as you give us ideas about ways in which you'd like to see Vermont's recovery efforts really focused. I believe strongly in the mission of organizations like the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, Vermont Works for Women, and Youth Build. And the reason I do is because all three of those organizations, they do very different things, but they unify around a fairly common objective, which is to support young people who could really benefit from hands-on experiences where they learn not just some skills that will be useful to them possibly in the workforce, but also how to work in teams, how to solve problems, how to build confidence, how to work with people who aren't like them. It breaks up the cliques that you see in most schools and really brings people together in a different environment than many kids experience in their normal lives. And so I believe that those organizations' models present an interesting opportunity to take it even bigger. Right now, it is expected that higher education across the country and here in Vermont might see a 10 to 15% reduction in students enrolling because many students are worried that if they are expecting a 4-year on-campus experience and then they're going to show up and be told they have to go home and do it staring at a computer, many people are contemplating taking a what they now call a gap year. And the question then is, if a number of people are going to take a gap year, some of them will get jobs for the year and do something like that. But could we build some kind of service corps that roughly models after or even is managed by the Youth Conservation Corps, Vermont Works for Women, and Recycle North, Youth Build? Those organizations have experience dealing with this, and to me, it could be a really positive sign of rebirth for our state if hundreds and hundreds of young people came together in publicly beneficial projects that also happen to get them ready to have successful adult lives. So those are just a few examples of things that ought to be on your minds as you think about giving me suggestions about how our recovery should look, what types of things you'd like to see different than the way they've been in the past. Obviously, we can't solve every problem in such a constrained period of time, but now is a moment to be thoughtful about what we want to look like in the future. And sometimes it takes a pretty serious shakeup like COVID-19 to help us do that. So I'll be back tomorrow at 5:30. I'm going to be speaking to some people who work at parent-child centers, which effectively provide a whole range of services to people, including childcare, including work assistance to help people get into jobs, and ask them how COVID-19 and this experience has affected the families they serve. The primary reason I've asked to speak with them and to do it in a public way so that you can benefit from it is I feel as though oftentimes there are some who say, well, if someone, hasn't really worked a lot, or they kind of settle for a low-paying job, or only one person in the household works, why should the government get involved in providing them help? My life's tough enough. I got to pay all my bills. And I think what you'll hear tomorrow in my discussion is a bit more of the backstory of the families who are often served by programs that are supported by your state funds, because they are your dollars. And they'll be able to offer a bit of an insight into what happens when those programs aren't there and how it impacts all of us in the community, so that perhaps we'll feel a little bit more understanding and ownership of the activities of these parent-child centers. So with that, I'm going to sign off and say thanks for joining me, and I'll be back tomorrow at 5:30, and I hope you stay safe.